Have you ever stopped to wonder why 90% of the people you know, the ones grinding from 9 to 5, the ones obsessed with hustle culture, the ones saving every penny, never actually get wealthy? And yet there's that top 10%, the ones who seem to work 4 hours a day, spend 3 months a year traveling, and yet their net worth doubles while they sleep. Is it luck? Is it an inheritance? No. It's the 90-10 rule. Today, I'm going to tell you the truth your professors, your employers, and the mainstream financial media are too afraid to admit. I'm going to show you why your hard work is actually your greatest liability. But before we dive deep, I have a question for you. If I gave you 2 doors, which one would you open? Door A, a prestigious career where you work 70 hours a week for a 6-figure salary. Door B, a leveraged system where you work 5 hours a week but generate a 7-figure profit. 90% of you are conditioned to pick door A because you've been brainwashed to believe that effort equals value. To think like a billionaire, you must first unlearn the lies of the middle class. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how the elite place their bets, how they never truly lose, and what that specific 10% of activity is that can replace your next 10 years of grinding. If you stay until the end, I promise you, you will never look at your to-do list the same way again. Let's start with the biggest lie of all, the hard work myth. The world tells you that the more you sweat, the more you earn. That is a flat-out lie. If sweat equaled wealth, the construction worker would be the CEO, and the CEO would be the janitor. The first law of the 90-10 rule is, aggressively eliminate the noise. 90% of what you do every day is just noise. Checking emails, attending useless meetings, micromanaging small tasks. This is the 90% busy work that yields only 10% of your results. Billionaires understand that their wealth isn't generated by doing work. It's generated by making high-stakes decisions. One wrong decision can wipe out 10 years of effort. One right decision can leapfrog you ahead by a decade. Think about Elon Musk. He runs 5 massive companies simultaneously. Does he work 5 times harder than you? Does he have 120 hours in his day? Of course not. He focuses exclusively on what we call high-leverage activities. The elite don't look for winning bets. They look for asymmetric risk. This is the secret that keeps 90% of the population stuck in the rat race. The average person thinks linearly. I work 10 hours, I get $100? The billionaire thinks exponentially. How can I risk $100 where the downside is capped, but the upside is $100,000? Listen closely, because the next part will dismantle everything you thought you knew about your time's true value. To understand the 90-10 rule, you must first understand the most dangerous drug in the modern economy, the hourly wage. Most people are trapped in a linear income model. You trade 1 hour for X amount of dollars. This is a 1-to-1 ratio. This is a loser's game. Why? Because you are a finite resource. You have a ceiling on your time and therefore a ceiling on your wealth. Billionaires don't trade time. They trade systems. The 10% of activities that generate 90% of wealth all share one common characteristic: leverage. There are 4 types of leverage that the 90-10 rule applies to. If you aren't using at least 2 of these, you aren't building wealth. You're just working a high-end job. First, capital. Using money to buy other people's time and assets. This is why the rich get richer even during a recession. Their money is out there working 24/7 while they are at dinner. Second, labor. This is the traditional way. Hiring people to do the tasks that are below your internal hourly rate. If your goal is to make $500 an hour, but you are still spending an hour doing your own laundry or answering basic emails, you are literally stealing from your future self. Third and fourth, code and media. These are the new wealth pillars. This video you are watching right now. This is leverage. I recorded it once, but it can be viewed by millions while I sleep. Code and media have a 0 marginal cost of replication. That means once the work is done, the 90-10 rule takes over, and the 10% effort results in 90% of the long-term profit. Now, ask yourself, which of these levers are you pulling? If the answer is none, then you are part of the 90% who are providing the labor for the 10% who own the systems. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. Most of you know this, yet you don't act. Why? Because of the execution gap. In the 90-10 world, execution isn't about doing more things. It's about doing the right things with obsessive focus. The average person has 20 different priorities. The billionaire has 3. They realize that 90% of opportunities are actually distractions in disguise. When a billionaire says no to a $100,000 deal, it's because they are protecting the space for the $100 million deal. The 90-10 rule requires a level of ruthlessness that most people find offensive. It means ignoring the urgent to focus on the important. It means firing the 90% of clients who cause 90% of the headaches but only provide 10% of the revenue. Do you have the courage to fire your distractions? Because if you don't, you will remain a slave to them. Now let's talk about the mathematics of winning. How do billionaires place bets where they literally cannot lose the long-term game? How do they turn a 10% chance into a 90% certainty? The answer lies in a concept called the portfolio effect, and it's going to change the way you look at failure forever. Most people live their lives in a state of symmetric risk. You take a job, you trade your time, and if you work hard, you might get a 3% to 5% raise. Your downside is losing your job. Your upside is a tiny, capped increment. This is a linear, losing equation because the effort required to get that 5% raise often consumes 90% of your mental capacity. The 90-10 rule dictates that the elite spend 90% of their energy seeking out the 10% of opportunities where the downside is capped, but the upside is infinite. Let's look at what I call the venture capital mindset. When a billionaire investor looks at 10 companies, they already know that 9 of them will likely fail. They don't just expect it. They budget for it. Why? Because they aren't looking for a 10% return on 10 companies. They are looking for a 10,000% return on one. The 90% of their failures are small, controlled losses. But that one single success, the 10%, doesn't just cover the losses. It changes the gravitational pull of their entire net worth forever. This is the fat tail event. While the middle class is terrified of being wrong once, the billionaire is busy being wrong 90% of the time, so they can be right in a way that makes history. Are you playing a game where you have to be right every single day just to survive? Or are you playing a game where you only have to be right once to win forever? This brings us to the concept of optionality. In the 90-10s framework, you don't need a crystal ball to see the future. You need a net wide enough to catch the lightning when it strikes. Billionaires focus 90% of their resources on stability to ensure they never go to zero, but they keep 10% of their resources in high variance bets. This is the barbell strategy. On one side of the barbell, you have extreme safety. On the other, you have extreme speculation. The middle, the average risk, is where the 90% of the population lives, and that is where wealth goes to die. The middle is where you find mutual funds that barely beat inflation and safe corporate jobs that disappear during a merger. The 90-10s rule says, be extremely safe with your foundation, so you can be extremely aggressive with your 10% bets. Now, let's talk about cognitive leverage. Why do some people seem to have luck follow them? It's not luck. It's the 90-10s rule applied to information. The average person consumes 90% junk information. News, social media, gossip, which leads to 10% of their wisdom. The billionaire spends 90% of their time studying the Lindy effect. Ideas that have stood the test of time for centuries. They read the classics, they study human psychology, and they analyze the failures of those who came before them. They know that 10% of the books ever written contain 90% of the world's actionable wisdom. They don't read to finish a book. They read to find the one sentence that will give them a $10 million edge. Are you drowning in the 90% of noise, or are you hunting for the 10% of signal? Most people are busy. Billionaires are productive. There is a violent difference. Being busy is often a form of laziness, lazy thinking, and indiscriminate action. Productive people know that if they win the morning by doing the one 10% task that moves the needle, the rest of 90% of the day doesn't even matter. Think about your current income stream. If you stopped working today, how long would it last? For the 90%, it ends in 30 days. For the 10%, it lasts for generations. That is because the 10% have decoupled their income from their heartbeat. They have built monuments of wealth that stand regardless of whether they are awake or asleep. But here's the secret that no one tells you. Building that monument doesn't take 90% more work. It takes 10% more courage. The courage to look unproductive to the outside world while you build your system. The courage to say no to a steady paycheck to pursue a scalable asset. As we move into the next phase, I'm going to show you the engine room. I will break down the exact 3 milestones you must hit to cross over from the 90% who pay the bills to the 10% who own the world. If you think you've understood leverage so far, wait until you see how we apply it to compound interest and time dilation. Welcome to the engine room. This is where the 90-10s rule stops being a philosophy and starts becoming a mathematical inevitability. Most people look at wealth as a mountain they have to climb. Billionaires look at wealth as a flywheel they have to start. Once a flywheel hits a certain velocity, the 10% of effort you put in doesn't just result in 90% of the output. It results in 900%. To reach this level, you must pass through the 3 milestones of financial dilation. Milestone 1, the survival decoupling. 90% of the population is stuck in a loop where their survival depends on their daily output. If they don't hunt, they don't eat. The first 10% of your journey must be dedicated to one thing: buying back your basic survival time. This isn't about luxury, it's about FU money on a micro scale. It's the amount of capital required to cover your base expenses for 12 months without lifting a finger. Why is this a 90-10s move? Because once your survival is decoupled from your time, your risk appetite changes. You can finally stop taking safe 90% bets and start looking for the 10% infinite upside opportunities. You cannot think like a billionaire if you are worried about next month's rent. Survival is the ultimate distraction. Milestone 2, the velocity of capital. In the engine room, we don't save money. We manage the velocity of money. The 90% of people who remain poor think that money is a store of value. They put it in a savings account and watch it rot at 2% interest while inflation eats it at 7%. They are literally paying the bank to lose their wealth. The 10% know that money is a vehicle of energy. It must move. If your money isn't moving into assets that produce more money, it is dying. Billionaires use the 90-10s rule here by keeping 90% of their wealth in hard assets. Real estate, established businesses, and private equity, while using the 10% of cash flow to fuel new, aggressive ventures. This is how you create a self-funding ecosystem. Your assets pay for your bets. If the bet fails, your assets are still there. If the bet wins, you buy more assets. It is a closed-loop system where failure is a line item, not a catastrophe. Milestone 3, the arbitrage of expertise. This is the highest form of the 90-10s rule. It is when you stop being the worker or the manager and you become the architect. The 90% try to be good at everything. They are jack of all trades, masters of none. The 10% identify their zone of genius. This is the 10% of your skills that produce 90% of your value. For Elon Musk, it's first principles engineering and vision. For Warren Buffett, it's capital allocation. They don't waste time on anything else. They hire the best 90% to handle the rest. Now let's talk about the silent killer of wealth: complexity. The 90% believe that a complex business or a complex investment strategy is better. They love black box algorithms and 50-page business plans. Billionaires know that complexity is a tax. It consumes 90% of your time maintenance and yields only 10% in results. The 90-10 rule applied to strategy means radical simplicity. If you cannot explain your path to $1 billion on the back of a napkin, you don't have a strategy. You have a wish. Amazon started by selling books. Google started with a search bar. They mastered the 10% of the market that mattered and used that as a lever to move the remaining 90%. Are you making your life more complex to feel busy, or are you stripping it down to the essentials to become powerful? As your capital grows, you will face the temptation of the 90%. You will want to buy the jet, the mansion, and the lifestyle before you finish the engine. This is the delayed gratification gap. Billionaires are masters of time dilation. They can wait 10 years for a result that the average person wants in 10 minutes. They know that the 90% of the world's wealth is created in the final 10% of the time. This is the nature of compound interest. It looks like nothing's happening for years, then suddenly it explodes. Most people quit at year 9. The billionaire is just getting started at year 10. Look at the screen. This is the wealth curve. Notice how the line stays flat for the first 90% of the graph. That is the valley of disappointment. That is where 90% of you will give up. But if you can survive that 90% with your 10% of focus, you hit the point of inevitability. We are about to enter the final, most controversial part of this journey. I am going to show you the dark side of the 90-10 rule. I will explain why your current social circle is the 90% anchor holding you back, and why you might have to leave everyone behind to reach the summit. This is the part they don't talk about in the self-help books, but it is the part that defines the winners. There is a price for the 10%. A price that most people are unwilling to pay, which is exactly why they remain in the 90%. You've heard the cliche, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. But the billionaire mindset looks at this through the lens of network density and information flow. If 90% of your social circle is composed of people who trade time for money, people who complain about the economy, and people who seek safety over leverage, you are mathematically anchored to their tax bracket. Your brain is a biological machine designed for social mimicry. If everyone around you is saving $10, your subconscious will fight you every time you try to invest $10,000. This is the crab mentality. When one crab tries to climb out of the bucket, the others pull it back down. Not because they hate the crab, but because its success highlights their own failure. In the 90-10 rule, your social circle is either a propellant or an anchor. 90% of your friends are likely distractions. They are people you know out of habit, not out of shared vision. To reach the 10%, you have to perform a social audit. You have to realize that you cannot take everyone with you to the summit. The air gets thinner the higher you climb, and most people don't have the lungs for it. Billionaires don't network in the way you think. They don't go to mixers and exchange business cards. They build alumni networks of value. They spend 90% of their social energy on the 10% of people who are multipliers, people who have more leverage, more capital, and more specialized knowledge than they do. They understand the law of rejection. To say yes to a billionaire lifestyle, you have to say no to 1,000 middle-class invitations. You have to be okay with being called arrogant, obsessed, or changed. Because if you haven't changed, you aren't growing. Now let's look at the psychology of the summit. The 90% are driven by fear of loss. The 10% are driven by fear of waste. The average person is terrified of losing their savings, losing their job, or losing their status. This fear keeps them paralyzed. They spend 90% of their life playing defense. The billionaire is terrified of wasting their potential, wasting their time, and wasting their leverage. They realize that the greatest risk isn't failing. It's succeeding at things that don't matter. They spend 90% of their life playing offense. This shift from defense to offense is the hardest transition you will ever make. It requires you to stop asking, what if I lose? And start asking, what if I'm right? Let's talk about the 90-10 audit of your day. Most people start their day by reacting. They check their phones, they answer messages, they deal with other people's emergencies. They give away the most valuable 10% of their day, the morning, to the 90% of the world's noise. A billionaire protects their first 90 minutes with religious ferocity. They know that if they can win those 90 minutes by working on their 10% high leverage task, the rest of the day is a bonus. They don't react to the world. They force the world to react to them. Are you a volumetric worker or a linear worker? A volumetric worker thinks, how many things did I do today? A linear worker thinks, how much closer did I get to my goal? The 90-10 rule is about ruthless prioritization. It's the Pareto principle on steroids. It means looking at your to-do list and realizing that 8 out of 10 things on there shouldn't even be done by you. They should be delegated, automated, or deleted. If you're a business owner and you are still fixing your own website or doing your own bookkeeping or running your own errands, you aren't an entrepreneur. You are a self-employed slave. You are trapped in the 90%. The 10% recognize that their only job is to be the chief leverage officer. Your job is to find the levers, pull them, and watch the world move. But there is a final trap, the most dangerous one. It's called the luxury trap. It's when you get your first taste of the 10% and you immediately use that new wealth to buy back into the 90% lifestyle. The expensive cars, the designer clothes, the look of wealth. In the final block, I'm going to show you how to avoid the fake rich trap and how to build generational velocity. I will show you how to ensure that once you hit the 10%, you and your children's children never fall back into the 90% ever again. This is the secret of dynastic wealth. We have reached the end of the map. You now understand the leverage, the mathematics of risk, and the social price of the summit. But there is one final hurdle that destroys 90% of the people who actually manage to get rich. The gravity of reversion. History is littered with families who made millions in one generation and lost it all in the next. They hit the 10%, but they didn't have the 90-10 infrastructure to stay there. To truly think like a billionaire, you must stop thinking in years and start thinking in centuries. This is the secret of dynastic wealth. The 90% view wealth as a destination. A big house, a fast car, a comfortable retirement. The 10% view wealth as a foundation for sovereignty. They don't just want to be rich, they want to be anti-fragile. They want to build a system that gets stronger when the world gets more chaotic. The 90-10 rule applied to legacy means 90% of your wealth should be in assets that outlive you, and 10% should be in the education of your successors. The biggest mistake the newly rich make is giving their children 90% of their money and 10% of their values. The result? The money is gone in 48 months. The 10%, the elite families like the Rothschilds or the Rockefellers, do the opposite. They focus 90% of their energy on passing down the mindset, the network, and the systems. They know that if their children have the 10% billionaire DNA, they can lose all the money and build it back in a decade. Are you building a bank account, or are you building a dynasty? This brings us to the infinite game. The 90% play finite games. They play to win a specific trophy. A promotion, a certain net worth, a social status. Once they win, they stop. And because they stop, they begin to decay. The 10% play the infinite game. The goal isn't to win. The goal is to keep playing. For a billionaire, the work isn't a means to an end. The work is the expression of their highest self. They don't retire because you don't retire from being who you are. Their 10% high leverage work is so aligned with their purpose that it gives them energy instead of draining it. This is the ultimate form of the 90-10 rule. When 90% of your life is automated or delegated, the remaining 10%, your creative genius, becomes your entire existence. As we close this journey, look back at where you started. You started by worrying about saving $10. I am leaving you with the vision of saving a legacy. The 90-10 rule is a filter. It filters out the noise from the signal, the busy from the productive, and the followers from the architects. Most of the people watching this have already clicked away. They couldn't handle the depth. They couldn't handle the truth. But you are still here. That means you are already part of the 10% who have the attention span to master the complex. Now you have a choice. You can close this video and go back to the 90% life. Back to the hard work myth, back to the symmetric risk, back to the social anchors. Or you can take the first step of leverage. Audit your life today. Find the 90% of things that are stealing your time and give you nothing in return. Fire them. Delete them. Ignore them. Find your 10%. Find your lever. And pull it with everything you have. The world is designed by the 10% to be consumed by the 90%. Which side of that equation do you want to be on? The choice was never about the money. The choice was always about freedom. I am Abdullah, and this is the way. I'll see you at the summit.